Story 1. When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years old, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night my friend and I would walk through the woods. We called this the ritual. This particular night we decided to walk further into the woods than usual. We had flashlights, we liked to try and navigate through the woods with them, turned off. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite when we heard soft whispering behind us. Obviously we hit the flashlights and spun around. Didn't see anything. So we kept walking and we hear it again. This time we stop and look around a bit before we decided to head back to our campsite. Then we see what's whispering. It's a lady crawling on the ground, whispering just random words. She was wearing dark clothes and was covered in dirt. When she sees that we notice her, she stands up and declares that she is looking for her campsite. We ended up walking her back to the campground and tried helping her find her group. Turns out she was just super drunk high and got lost trying to find a bathroom. Her friends didn't even notice she was missing, and if we didn't go that far into the woods, she would have been lost all night. It was pretty creepy. Story 2. I live in a rural town surrounded by mountains and forests, so camping is almost a weekly event, even in winter. The one I can't shake is when me and a friend broke off from our group of other 16 to 19-year-olds to camp by a better fishing spot about a mile away. We only brought one tent for the group, so we built a lean-to against a large boulder in a clearing. I couldn't sleep because I had the feeling something was watching us. I assumed it was a mountain lion, which isn't that big of a deal considering their behavior, so I threw some more logs on the fire. I looked up from the fire, and under the light of a full moon, there was a man standing at the edge of the clearing about 80 yards away. I was frozen and couldn't take my eyes off him, while he assumedly stared back. He walked off in the opposite direction after about a minute or two. I doubt he had any ill intentions, but I sat there holding my friend's .357 the whole night. I didn't wave or call out because I was terrified. I was frozen since I was 16 and inexperienced. Nowadays I would call out and see what's going on. Story 3. Camping at Yellowstone Grand Tetons a few years ago. He set up our camper at an actual site and decided to do some 2-day-long backpack trips in some of the longer trails. The second one we went to was Cascade Valley Canyon. Absolutely beautiful. So get about 10 miles into the 22-mile loop and decide to set up our tent here since it was getting dark. We cook some food and chill for a bit before heading to bed. Around 2 a.m., we're all awakened by something just outside the tent. My mind immediately jumps to bears or wolves or something. Then it starts talking. I will never forget it. I think there's 3 or 4 in the tent. Let's just get out of here. None of us could sleep the rest of the night. At the crack of dawn, we hightail it out of there. Made excellent time, hiked the 12 miles in about 3 hours and got to Ranger Station. Reported what happened. They said they had received a call similar to our story in the middle of the night. They sent rangers into the trail at dawn. Never found out what was going down. Didn't hear of anyone getting hurt. But then again, I didn't really look into it. Story 4. A few friends and I had a long weekend, 5 days off from school, and we decided to go camping in the North GA Mountains. We packed a big 10-person tent. There were 5 of us, 2 guys, 3 girls, and loaded up my buddy's truck. He and I had some experience being outdoors camping, hiking, hunting, and he's an Army vet, so we packed really well and had all sorts of amenities like a propane stove, grill, fold-up cots, portable shower. We were in it for the whole weekend. We left Wednesday afternoon and parked the truck in a small town and started hiking into the woods to find a spot. It was a fairly normal hike until we got about 4 or 5 miles in. The first time we noticed something strange was when we came into a little clearing in the woods with a big pond, tiny lake in it. We stepped into the open area and everything stopped. No birds chirping, no squirrels running around, even the clouds and wind seemed to stop moving. My buddy and I both thought, well shit, there's gotta be a predator nearby, and took out our handguns. It's the law in Kennesaw, just in case. I've never seen a bear in Georgia, so we figured it was a mountain lion or maybe some coyotes. My friend and I were looking around the edge of the clearing, and he grabbed me. He nodded across the water, and when I looked, I saw what seemed to be a woman standing just at the tree line. She was maybe 150 yards away. We assumed she must live somewhere nearby, and so we continued walking past the water and clearing. As we headed back into the woods, I looked over my shoulder at where she was standing, but she was gone. The sounds of the forest returned once we got into the trees. We made a campsite about 2 miles past that, as it was getting late, and we didn't want to be stuck building camp in the dark. We got everything unpacked and set up and built a fire. Popped a couple of beers and sat down to hang out. There was a girl I was interested in on the trip, and we'd been flirting, so after a few beers and the sun was down, we snuck away from the fire under the pretense that she wanted help setting up part of the tent. We started fooling around, and after a few minutes she stopped and looked at me funny. I asked what was wrong, and she said nothing. It just got really quiet. We both quickly dressed and headed back outside to the fire. The others hadn't noticed anything strange and didn't mention anything wrong, except joking with Oos that it took Oos a long time to fix the tent. On the first morning we found that the propane stove had been turned on, but not ignited, and had gone empty overnight. None of us had used it. The second morning we noticed some things had gone missing. A lantern we left outside by the fire was gone. My crush's sweatshirt she left on a little folding chair stool. We figured we just misplaced things or someone had used them and put them somewhere else. During the second full day, Friday, we were looking for a waterfall that we read online was in the area. We were following the river upstream when everything went silent again. My buddy nudged me while we were walking and indicated up to the top of a hill next to the river. I looked up through the trees and was just able to make out the figure of the same woman. Same clothes and all, just standing. I couldn't tell if she was looking at us or not, but she was just standing there. My buddy told the girls he thought he saw a mountain lion following us and was going to go scare it off. He hustled up the hill making a lot of noise and came back about 10 miles later. He said he scared it off to the girls but told me aside that the woman wasn't there when he got up there. We found the waterfall and put it out of our minds as the girls decided to skinny dip in the river and titties can solve anything. We hiked back to camp and found it a mess. It wasn't totally trashed, but it was clear something had gotten into our stuff. We told the girls it was probably raccoons. We both took our guns to bed with us. That night, shit went sideways. I remember waking up because my crush was squeezing my arm. We had been sleeping cuddled up together. I opened my eyes and she hushed me before I could ask what was wrong. There was complete silence all around the tent. I looked across the tent and my buddy was sitting halfway up looking around. We both stayed awake for the next 2-ish hours until the sun started coming up, and then packed our stuff and we all headed out. The entire hike back into town was eerily silent. There were a couple points I thought I saw the woman through the trees but never got a clear sight of her. We avoided the lake completely and got back to the truck in what seemed like half the time it took to get out to the camp. After we were safely on the road back home, the girls and my buddy all started to tell everyone about moments they thought they saw the woman all weekend, but were too freaked out to mention it out loud, like she would go away if we ignored her. The wild part was none of us could describe her face. It's almost like it was blurry. Story 5. In the late 80s, I was in my early 20s, and 2 friends and I went camping in Central Florida. 2 of us were working for the Park Service at that time, so we were able to camp for free in other parks in the state. Both of us had done a lot of camping before. Me, I grew up camping with my family on every single vacation, all over the state. For the other friend with us, this was her first camping trip ever. We were camping in the youth area, which was empty that weekend, and was quieter and more isolated than the regular campsites. Later in the afternoon on the second day of our trip, we were all sort of spread out in the area of the campsite, being within shouting distance but enjoying a little solitude. I was collecting firewood. Every now and then I'd kind of feel like someone was watching me. I'd look around, see and hear nothing, and then shrug it off and go back to what I was doing. Later on, around sunset, we had the bonfire started. One of the rangers who lived on site about a quarter mile away came over with a truckload of firewood and a 6-pack of beer. We all sat around talking for a while. Well, after dark, we could suddenly hear what was probably a bunch of teenagers fooling around on one of the trails a couple miles away. Since the trails were closed at sunset, the ranger and my co-worker drove off to shoo them back to their campsites. My other friend and I were just relaxing around the fire, talking a little, mostly enjoying the night and the peace and quiet. All of a sudden, I had a cold chill go over me. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and out of nowhere, I was terrified. I tried to ignore it, but it kept building. I didn't say anything to my friend. I didn't want to scare her. Then I glanced over at her just as she glanced at me, and she said, "Do you feel that?" I said, "Yeah. I think maybe we'd better go to the car." We both felt like we were in deadly danger, but no idea from what. We started walking at a casual pace, not wanting to appear scared. Then halfway to the car, we looked at each other again and simultaneously broke into a dead run. We reached the car, jumped in and locked the doors, and turned on the headlights. I sat there with my pistol, feeling like it was totally inadequate for whatever was out there. We both just sat looking straight ahead. We were afraid to look around. I had the feeling at one point that if I turned my head and looked out the window, I'd see something that would drive me insane. I don't know how long we sat there. It was probably just a few minutes, but it felt like forever. Then it just left. We could actually feel it going away. A few minutes after that, the other two came back in the truck. We kind of laughed it off afterward. But I'll tell you, I've never been that scared before or since. I've faced a lot in my life, and nothing has so completely terrified me like that. I don't know what it was, but I'm still convinced we were in terrible danger. Story 6. Growing up in the woods and going camping, my family and I have our fair share of bizarre and scary stories. This one I just can't seem to wrap my head around, even to this day. My parents owned 35 acres of property in the deep Rockies, about 2-3 hours away from our home. We spent as much time as we could camping there, as we all loved it. It was secluded and beautiful, and we had a lot of freedom there as kids. My parents were both experienced campers and backpackers, and had both grown up in the mountains. One day we head up at night, arriving at the property at around 9 or 10 p.m. We were all tired and start to unpack the tents and such from the car. The minute we get out, though, we all get a strange feeling. It didn't feel normal or good. We had encountered wild predators at this point and knew the feeling of being watched. But this was like being watched from all sides. We also all noticed that there are no sounds. It is dead silent. Normally we would be hearing all of the insects and occasional owls, nighthawks, or bats, and just the general hum of a forest. Nothing. We all kind of laughed nervously and maybe mentioned a few things, but got to work setting up our tents nearby. This is when the real strange stuff starts to happen. We begin to hear rustling in the branches around us, about 10 feet off the ground it seems. It almost sounded like large creatures like monkeys or raccoons jumping from tree to tree loudly, and many of them. I've never ever seen raccoons have the ability to do something like that, and these sounds were clumsy, unlike birds. It gets louder and louder and becomes extremely unnerving. At this point, the tent is set up and my parents put my brother and I in there, telling us to stay inside. They go out with flashlights trying to make sense of this bizarre activity. As they are outside, we start to hear these bizarre calls. I have never ever heard anything like this before or since. Honestly, it almost sounded like humans mimicking some kind of primate holler or screech. There was an odd human-like aspect to it, and it's like they are calling and responding to each other from every direction, along with the branches cracking and rustling. My parents come back to the tent and tell us they couldn't see anything at all. I remember how shocked and frightened my mom looked, and it scared me because she was a badass that would stalk bears to get a good photo. Both my parents were not easily frightened in nature, or at all. We are all huddled together in the tent, confused, scared, and unsure of what to do. The sounds are so loud and everywhere it almost sounds like some crazy storm outside. Our dogs are cowered in between us all, totally freaked out. My dad decides to go out again, and I remember as he finishes unzipping the tent, the sounds stop. Just like that in an instant, and the oppressive, weird feeling is gone. He and my mom go out again to investigate, and again find nothing, except fallen branches and some strange marks up high on some trees. They come back, talk us down, and somehow manage to get us to sleep. We still talk about this to this day. None of us know what happened and have no explanation. Like I said, we had some crazy and strange things happen to us, but never anything remotely similar to what happened that night. Story 7. I was living in Brazil and a friend, and I decided to do a one-night out and back through mountainous rainforest terrain in one of the southern states. We mostly wanted to get some exercise and do a gear shakeout before going on a longer trip in Patagonia. The experience started out really tough. We were doing almost constant climbing and it was hot. Humidity was near 100% through lush vegetation. Eventually, we were pretty much in clouds and completely drenched from sweat and humidity. It was kind of hellish, soaked to the bone, with no chance of drying out. Fortunately, at that altitude, it gets below freezing frequently at night, so there weren't many insects or animals, only birds. We hiked for probably 8 hours with little progress. It was slow going through tough terrain. At early evening, we came to a flat spot, the first we'd seen in hours, and decided to make camp as it was starting to pour. I basically made camp in several inches of standing water. I was beat anyway, so I just sat in my tent reading. Around 3 a.m. I woke to a girl singing in the distance. The singing kept coming closer, until she was singing right at our tents. She pushed past us and the singing drifted off. She was singing, maybe a lullaby or children's song, about rain in Portuguese, but it sounded very strange. An hour later, I got woken up to the singing in the distance again. She was coming back towards us singing the same rain song. As she passed us, I could hear a little exasperation in her voice. She continued singing and went back in the direction of the trailhead. Another hour later, I was again woken up by her singing as she was again coming back towards us, except now she was also crying. She continued to cry and sing as she moved past us for the final time. We woke up that morning, looked at each other, said, "What the fuck was that?" and then got on our way. It was very eerie at the time, and I don't have an explanation for it. We were in an extremely isolated location, and the trail was definitely only used by recreational hikers, so I really can't say why this woman was out wandering, singing, and crying at 3 a.m. Story 8. I love to choose my outfits, but they tend to be skin tight or you see some skin. Anyway, I was walking home from school one day, and I was wearing a skirt with shorts underneath and stockings. The shirt doesn't necessarily matter for this part. While walking home, I was listening to music on high, trying to block out the world from a long day at school. I felt something brush up against behind me and didn't really think anything of it. I was a bit entranced in my music and could have even been humming. I noticed something brush up against me again, so I glanced behind me to see a man about 2 inches close to me. I screamed in surprise and apologized to him for screaming because he seemed pretty flustered himself. He walked in front of me and sped away. I couldn't tell, but I think he was trying to look up my skirt that would explain the weird feeling of wind while he was behind me. If that wasn't strange enough, it took me a while to finally get home. I stopped off and took some breaks to try and calm down. When I finally got home, I noticed someone I hadn't seen around my apartment. I thought I might have had a new neighbor because there was a guy under my stairway. He just looked like some kid who went to my high school. He was wearing a hoodie and basketball shorts. When I came up to my apartment, he moved directly underneath my staircase, which has holes in it, so you can look up and see the person through the stairs. I can notice this guy was definitely trying to look up my skirt. I had a pretty smug look on my face because I had worn shorts. When I had gotten to the top of my stairs, I noticed he pulled out his phone and was trying to take pictures. I was feeling extremely scared at this point. I had forgotten all about the guy from before and couldn't seem to unlock the door. My front door has an electric phone lock, and my phone had not been able to connect to the loco for some reason. I realized I couldn't get into my own house, and there was some creepy perv trying to take pictures of me right underneath my stairs. I looked underneath the stairs to see if he was still there. He most assuredly was. Not only was he there, but he was also jacking off. Right underneath my stairs, he just had his penis out and was just there. I about had a heart attack. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't run down the stairs and leave because he was right there, and I couldn't go into my house because it was locked and I couldn't connect to it. I decided to call my dad and ask him what to do. My dad called the police for me, which was probably what I should have done in the first place, but I have no time to think. I had sat out of eyesight and yelled at the perv to leave, but I didn't know if he was aggressive or if he would respond. I decided to just make a run for the community office at our apartment complex. I made a plan to find a phone there and find people so he couldn't harass me if he got the chance. I made the choice and started running down the stairs into the office. I looked back and he wasn't there. Relieved but still full of adrenaline, I ran to the house. My dad had finally unlocked it. Later, the police came by and asked me some questions. They said they keep an eye out, but they never found him. I haven't seen him since and hope it stays that way. Story 9. My family has a cabin. It's really just an old mobile home. In the middle of the woods in northern Michigan. We've had it for years and years, but only recently some unexplained odd things had happened, and the police have even been out to search the place. The last time I went to the cabin was the worst experience. I went up with my friend. For context purposes, we're 2 girls in our late 20s and arrived at dark. We got out and unloaded but had trouble turning on the power. It has an outside electrical box because the lock was frozen shut. We were trying to get it unstuck but kept hearing noises around the cabin. Finally, it sounded like the noises were very close to us, and as we weren't getting anywhere with the lock, we rushed inside in case it was a bear milling around. We sat inside for maybe 5 minutes before deciding to drive out to the nearest town to get a motel for the night. We would come back once it was light to get the power on. We grabbed a few things and headed back out to the car. I got in and turned the car on, but nothing happened. The car was 100% unresponsive. The doors wouldn't even lock. My car had absolutely no issues. We had just driven 3 hours to the cabin without any problems. Something had to have happened to the car in the few minutes we were inside. I told my friend we needed to get back inside. We got to the door and locked up behind us. We looked at each other, suddenly scared. Our car was totally dead. We had absolutely zero cell service and we had no power. We tried to stay calm. We made a new game plan. We were just going to rough it for the night and then, at first light, walk in the direction of civilization until we got cell signal or ran into help. Only a short time later we were sitting together in the living room quietly talking. Suddenly that was 2 sharp, loud knocks on the back door of the cabin. We both absolutely froze. We sat there, horrified and shaking, just waiting for someone to push their way into the door or window. This was a mobile home, so it would take very minimal effort to break in. We were met with only silence, but now knew someone was outside. What did they want? It was much scarier to think they hadn't broken in. They just potentially sabotaged our car and were now knocking on our door to toy with us. We sat, silent and terrified. After a while, we started talking again, only to have something bang on a window. Just one loud smack. I've never been so scared. We quickly realized we just had to stay alert and awake until morning. We just had to hope that whoever was outside didn't try to get in. It didn't, but pattern of the knocks on the window continued for hours. As soon as the sun was up, we ventured outside. We took a look under the hood of my car next. It turns out the bolt that clamps the metal piece to the battery terminal was loosed almost completely. The nut was all the way loosened. 1 or 2 turns more and they would have fallen off completely. Story 10. I've had some spooky experiences. Went camping with my brother in the Australian outback, literally the middle of nowhere. It was a 40-0 day in WA, and we were unbearably fatigued by night, and the humidity stuck around in the evening. Slept in a 2-man tent with my bro and was awoken by him shuffling about. Checked my watch, 2:45 a.m. Needed to take a leak. Stepped outside and walked 30 ft to the base of a colossal oak. It wasn't even that dark. The light of the moon was powerful, but there were pockets of deep shadow. I glanced left and right and listened closely because I was unsure of any hallucinations I was going through because of the heat. I looked left again. There was a distinct human figure that looked unrealistically tall. I squinted at it and my heart was pounding. "Hello?" I said. The noise it made sounded like a very quiet, deep laugh. I swear I was going mad. I kept my eyes locked onto it as I bolted back to our tent. Its head followed my gaze. I unzipped the tent and woke up my brother. By the time I looked back, the bastard was gone. Don't know what bore water I drank that day, but I definitely saw something bizarre that night.
The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.